Thank you for coming today and wanting to know more about what came to be known as the Korean conflict, but indeed was the Korean War. Here's a bit of the history. The Korean Peninsula, which thrusts southeasterly from China towards the Japanese islands, earned the moniker the Hermit Kingdom from 1600 until late 1800. Only Japan and China had access, and by 1895, Japan alone had gained control. By 1910, the Japanese had annexed Korea, ruling it until Japan's defeat in World War II in 1945. After the end of the war, Soviet and U.S. forces moved into Korea. Soviet troops occupied north of the 38th parallel. American forces fortified the south. Within the next year, the U.S. began to draw down its forces until all were gone by 1949. The following year, the U.S. made it known that South Korea lay outside its area of strategic interest. North Korean communists seized the opportunity and pounced on June 25, 1950, to invade the South with Chinese and Russian backing. The newly formed United Nations Security Council demanded that the communists return to the 38th parallel, but they ignored this plea. President Harry Truman, with congressional backing, sent American ground forces into action, while the UN also requested support from member nations. On July 1st, part of the Army's 24th Infantry Division arrived in Pusan and pushed northward, but met overwhelming numbers. On July 19th, the Army's 1st Cavalry Division and 25th Infantry Division reinforced them to establish a perimeter in the southeast known as the Pusan Perimeter. By late July, the Army's 2nd Infantry Division and the 1st Marine Provisional Brigade helped to secure this perimeter. This proved to be a turning point in the conflict, which had seen the communists securing victory after victory up to this point. By September 8th, the Allies had halted the communist advance. In a surprise move, General Douglas MacArthur transported the Marine 10th Corps by ship to Incheon, just south of Seoul, which was held by the North Koreans. The Marines retook Seoul by late September. At the same time, General Walker, in command of the Pusan forces, had fought his way out of the Pusan perimeter, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy, and had arrived in Seoul to join MacArthur, who then demanded that the North Koreans surrender. They refused. The Allies then invaded the north, the 8th Army in the west, the 10th Corps in the east. The 8th drove towards the Yalu River, dividing North Korea and China. Here, the Allies were met with a massive Chinese army, over 300,000, and were forced to retreat. On December 8th, 20,000 U.S. Marines, surrounded by Chinese forces, started an historic retreat from the Chosan Reservoir to the port of Hungnam. By Christmas, 105,000 U.S. and Korean forces, along with 91,000 refugees, plus 17,500 vehicles, had been safely evacuated from Hungnam. General Walker, who commanded the 8th Army, was killed in a Jeep accident and was quickly replaced by General Matthew B. Ridgway on December 27th. He restored confidence, repulsed the enemy which had driven south again to Seoul, and by March 1951 had reestablished the 38th parallel, dividing the north from the south. Truce talks began at this point, but fierce fighting continued for 2 more years in what became known as the Battle for the Hills, including names like Bloody Ridge, Finger Ridge, Heartbreak Ridge, Old Baldy, and Porkchop Hill. Efforts to end the war made little headway until the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin died in March 1953. Soviet leaders then began speaking of settling disputes peacefully. All parties signed an armistice on July the 27th, 1953. America's total casualties numbered almost 163,000, with over 54,000 killed in action. Since this had been a United Nations action, it is worth noting that other countries suffered more than 17,000 casualties, with 3,000 killed. The South Koreans had 400,000 casualties with 58,000 dead, but over 1 million civilians were killed. Korea remains divided to this day, with devastating consequences for those living in North Korea. South Korea, on the other hand, boasts of a free society, having become a major contributor to the world economy with a standard of living far, far above that of the North. On behalf of all of us here in DeKalb County, Alabama, we want to thank you for having come to Patriot's Memorial Park. And as we've said before, we hope that you will go away not only with a deeper appreciation for those who have served, but perhaps also with a heart to serve in your community, in our military, as a first responder, there where you live, or with the U.S. military around the world. Thank you for coming.